Wir befinden uns jetzt in dem Arrestzellentrakt. Gleich die erste Zelle rechts wurde durch den Schwarzafrikaner belegt und hier.
A man is found burned to death in a locked police cell. His wrists and ankles are in shackles. The mattress beneath him is gone, reduced to ash. The walls are covered in smoke. Police state he started the fire himself with a lighter. This is the story of Oury Jalloh. On the morning of January 7th, 2005, Oury Jalloh was walking through the streets of Dessau, Germany. He was an asylum seeker from Sierra Leone who had been living in Dessau since 2001. While walking, he approached a group of female city sanitation workers and asked to use one of their phones. The woman, noting that he appeared intoxicated and unsteady, felt uncomfortable and contacted the police. Two officers, Hans-Ulrich M. and Udo S., were dispatched to the scene. When they arrived, they encountered Oury, who reportedly refused to show identification and resisted their attempt to question him. The officers restrained him in a headlock, placed him in a patrol car, and took him into custody for harassment. At the police station, he was taken to the basement processing area. A police doctor was called to assess his condition. They completed a blood test, which showed a high level of alcohol in Oury's system, as well as traces of cocaine. Despite this, the doctor declared him fit for detention. According to reports, Oury became agitated and tried to strike his head against the wall and table. The doctors advised that he be restrained to prevent self-injury. Two officers then strip searched him and escorted him to detention cell 5 in the basement corridor. The cell had tiled walls and floors, a metal-anchored platform, and a plastic-covered mattress made of polyurethane. He was restrained at 4 points. His right wrist was secured to a wall fixture, while his left wrist and both ankles were shackled to anchors on the platform. He was to be checked every 30 minutes until he could appear before a judge. Upstairs, the duty control room monitored the detention area through a camera and intercom system. Policewoman Beate Hoffner and her superior Andrea Schubert were on shift. Hoffner later stated that she heard the sound of chains rattling and shouting through the intercom. At 11:45 a.m., a routine cell check was conducted. Not long afterwards, Hoffner said she heard a hissing sound, followed by a sloshing noise through the intercom. She told Schubert and asked him to go downstairs to investigate. Approximately 20 minutes later, the fire alarm for the detention area was activated. According to Schubert, false alarms were common, so he switched it off. When it sounded the second time, he went to investigate. Schubert asked Officer Gerard Mobes, who was nearby, to accompany him to the basement. While they made their way downstairs, Hoffner remained in the control room. Through the intercom, she heard Oury's voice calling out, "Come untie me." She responded that someone was coming and told him to stay calm. Moments later, she heard the same voice shout the word, "Fire." This was the final thing he said. On the monitor, she could see Schubert entering the corridor with another officer. When the cell door was opened, thick black smoke poured out into the hallway. Hoffner heard Schubert yell, "Quick, fire extinguisher." Firefighters arrived within minutes. They entered the cell wearing breathing equipment and extinguished the remaining flames. Inside, they found Oury Jalloh lying on his back on the tiled platform, still secured by his wrists and ankles. The mattress beneath him had been almost completely destroyed by fire. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Within hours, investigators from the same station concluded that the fire had been started by Jalloh himself. They stated that he had hidden a lighter during the strip search, used it to ignite the mattress, and died as a result. No homicide suspects were identified, and the incident was treated as a case of self-inflicted death in police custody. The legal process. In the hours following his death, investigators from the same police station began the inquiry. Within that inquiry, the working theory that Oury had started the fire himself remained unchanged. Evidence from the cell was collected by local officers. The mattress remnants, pieces of clothing, and metal shackles were catalogued. Days later, a partially melted red lighter was added to the evidence list. It had not appeared in the original search video. No fingerprints, DNA, or fabric fibers belonging to Oury were found on it. Despite this, it became the center of the official explanation for how the fire began. An initial autopsy found no signs of external assault, recording the cause of death as heat shock and smoke inhalation. No X-rays were taken, and the video record of the crime scene was later destroyed. In March of 2005, Oury's friends, family, and community supporters founded the initiative in remembrance of Oury Jalloh. They arranged an independent autopsy to be completed by Professor Dr. Bratske. The autopsy revealed that Oury had a broken nose, though Bratske refused to determine whether it had happened before or after death. The initiative in remembrance of Oury Jalloh set out to challenge the official findings and seek a transparent investigation. 2 police officers, Hans-Ulrich M. and Andreas S., were later charged with causing bodily harm resulting in death. Their trial began in 2007. Prosecutors maintained that Oury had ignited the mattress himself while restrained. During proceedings, the presiding judge, Manfred Steinhoff, openly criticized the investigation. He said police had misled the court through false statements, missing files, and a lack of cooperation. Even so, he concluded that the available evidence was insufficient to convict the 2 officers. In December of 2008, both were acquitted. 2 years later, Germany's federal court overturned the acquittal and ordered a retrial. This time, the focus was not on how the fire began, but on whether officers had fulfilled their duty of care while Oury was in custody. In 2012, the court found Officer Andreas S. guilty of negligent homicide for failing to prevent the death. He was fined €10,800. No other officer faced conviction. In 2016, a state prosecutor authorized a new fire experiment. The test failed to reproduce the extent of the damage seen in Cell 5 without the use of a fire accelerant. In 2017, the Dessau public prosecutor formally opened a murder investigation, naming 2 police officers. The case was later transferred to the Halle prosecutor's office and closed that same year due to insufficient evidence of foul play. In 2019, further forensic analysis found that in addition to his broken nose, Oury had a broken rib, skull-based fractures, and ruptured eardrums. It was determined these injuries had occurred prior to his death. By 2020, a Parliament report acknowledged significant procedural failures by both police and investigators. In 2021, a British fire investigator reconstructed Cell 5 using an identical mattress and restrained layout. The test demonstrated that the fire could not have spread as it did without the use of an accelerant and an open cell door. In 2023, Germany's Federal Constitutional Court dismissed a complaint by Oury's brother. Judges ruled that prosecutors had already examined all reasonable leads. The family announced their intention to take the case to the European Court of Human Rights. Their argument stated that in cases of death in custody, the burden of proof lies with the state. The first contradictions. Soon after the fire, investigators began documenting Cell 5. Initial records listed a few small objects. These were a rivet, a zipper pull, fragments of chain, and melted plastic. There was no mention of a lighter. Photographs taken before Oury's body was removed showed the burned cell and melted mattress frame, but no lighter was visible. Days later, a partially melted red Tokai lighter appeared on the evidence list. It was described as having been found beneath Oury's body, though no photograph showed it there, and none of the officers present recalled retrieving it. The lighter remained largely intact, its color and shape preserved despite a fire that had melted metal shackles. Forensic testing later found no fingerprints, DNA or fabric traces on the lighter. The alarm system was another point of dispute. Schubert stated that false alarms were common, which is why he silenced the first alert, but maintenance records later showed no previous faults in the system. This contradicted his explanation for the delay in responding. The station's video evidence was also incomplete. The official footage ended before Oury's body was removed and before the debris search that later produced the lighter. When asked, investigators said the missing portion had been recorded over by mistake. No backup copy was ever found. Firefighters later reported that when they entered the basement, the corridor was already filled with smoke. The officers on duty had called for a fire extinguisher but could not enter due to heat and lack of visibility. When firefighters reached the cell, the flames were already dying out. Oury was found lying on his back, still restrained by both wrists and ankles, severely burnt. Despite unanswered questions about the evidence and timeline, the death was ruled self-inflicted within hours. That conclusion was entered into record before any laboratory testing, fire reconstruction, or independent review had taken place. At the time of the ruling, no external investigator was appointed and no alternate explanation was considered. The physical contradictions. Cell 5 was fitted with a smoke alarm system. Tests on the alarm system later confirmed that the smoke detector inside the cell would activate in under 1 minute once a visible flame appeared. A second detector in the ventilation system would trigger about 2 minutes later. This matched the real-time log for that day, where the alarm sounded first at 12:05 and again shortly after. The quick activation pattern was typical of a fast open flame rather than a slow smoldering fire. Independent reconstructions carried out over the years aimed to reproduce the fire. When the mattress cover was left intact, even a steady lighter flame did not ignite it. The surface blackened slightly and then went out once the flame was removed. Only when the cover was cut open and the foam exposed would it continue burning. Even then, it could not reach the level of destruction seen in the real-life fire without adding another substance. In 2013, British fire investigator Ian Peck conducted a reconstruction using 2 liters of petrol on a similar mattress. This recreated almost the same burn pattern, smoke residue, and heat damage as the original scene. Without any accelerant, all of the tests showed limited burning in the center of the mattress that went out within minutes. The smoke staining on the door of cell 5 also raised questions. Heavy soot was present both inside the cell and in the corridor outside. If the door had remained closed the whole time, the lack of oxygen would have slowed the fire and limited the spread of damage. Instead, the similar staining on both sides of the door indicated that the door had been opened while the fire was burning, before firefighters arrived. The burns on Oury's body were also uneven. Investigators identified deeper burning on the right side, while parts of his back and left shoulders were less affected. His left hand showed fire damage to his fingers, but no signs of movement or struggle. This burn pattern was consistent with someone who never moved during the fire, leaving experts to suggest he may have been unconscious during the fire. Medical examinations later revealed additional injuries. They included a broken nose, a skull-base fracture, a broken rib, and a ruptured eardrum. Independent experts said these injuries had occurred before death and were caused by blunt force. Toxicology results also showed no noradrenaline, a hormone that spikes during pain or panic, supporting that he was likely unconscious when the fire began. A second autopsy confirmed that these injuries had not been caused by the fire itself. In 2015, a comprehensive forensic review stated that the physical evidence did not support self-ignition. However, the classification of the case remained unchanged. The death of Oury continues to be officially recorded as a self-inflicted fire. Who was there? On the morning of January 7, 2005, Hans Ulrich M. and Udo S. were the arresting officers who brought Oury to the station. They detained him after a complaint from a group of city sanitation workers. At the station, a police doctor examined Oury and declared him fit for detention. In the control room above the holding cells, Beate Hoffner monitored the intercom and cameras. Her supervisor, Andreas Schubert, was also present. When the fire alarm sounded, Schubert silenced it and later went downstairs with Officer Gerard Mobes. Firefighters arrived minutes later and entered cell 5. They found Oury lying on his back, still restrained by his wrists and ankles. Paramedics attended and Oury was pronounced dead at the scene. What went missing? The official video from the cell ended before Oury's body was removed. The section showing the later debris search was missing. Investigators said it had been recorded over by mistake and no backup copy existed. Security footage from the detention corridor was also not preserved. The lighter later presented as evidence was not listed in the first scene report. No officer could confirm who found it or when it was collected. DNA, fingerprints and fiber tests on the lighter found no match to Oury. Clothing and mattress samples were not sealed or tested for accelerants until years later, by which time any residues had evaporated. Autopsy materials from the first examination lacked complete radiographic studies. Airway imaging was not preserved. Photographs were later reported as having been mislabeled. This has happened before. Oury's death was not the first at the Dessau Police Station. In 1997, a man named Hans-Jürgen Rose died of internal injuries just hours after being released from custody. In 2002, another man, Mario Bichterman, died in the same cell 5 where Oury would later be held. His death was ruled accidental and no homicide charges were filed. The same officers who had later been involved in Oury's case were on duty at the station during Bichterman's detention. The deaths in 1997 and 2002 raised early concerns about the treatment of detainees at the Dessau station. Across Germany, other deaths in custody have raised similar questions about restraint practices, cell monitoring, and police accountability. Between 1990 and 2020, more than 200 black people, people of color, and migrants died in police custody or during arrest. Many of those cases were closed without independent review. Human rights groups, including the Initiative in Remembrance of Oury Jalloh, have described this as part of a broader failure to properly investigate deaths in state custody. What's still missing? Nearly 2 decades later, Oury's death remains a suicide by lighter. No officer had been criminally convicted for actions related to his detention or death. The lighter, said to have started the fire, has never been linked to Oury through DNA, fingerprints, or fibers. No photograph shows it in the position where police claimed it was found. The missing portion of the video recording from cell 5 has never been recovered or explained. The cause of the pre-mortem injuries has never been determined. There has been no official explanation for how the fire spread so rapidly in a cell built to prevent it. And after multiple investigations, trials and reviews, no independent authority has ever been appointed to fully re-examine the case. 20 years later, the evidence needed to answer how and why Oury Jalloh died is still missing.